burger stand in California opened in 1948. Small menu, simple concept. Just burgers, fries, and shakes. Today, that little stand has become one of the most beloved restaurants in the entire country. Whenever they open a new location, people line up for hours, not minutes, hours. But here's the strange part. The company that has refused the very things that normally create massive growth won't franchise. They won't freeze their beef. They won't expand too fast. They've repeatedly refused offers that could have made the family billions of dollars. Why? Because the owners believe the company belongs to someone else, to God. They even print little Bible verses on their cups and wrappers and some of their packaging. Not giant letters, just small little references, quiet reminders. For decades, this one family has tried to run a burger company according to their faith in Christ, an unashamed faith in Jesus. And the result is one of the most respected restaurant cultures in America. Today, we are looking at and talking about, if you haven't realized yet, In-N-Out Burger. It is a fascinating story of this company that started in California in 1948. And I want to look at all these different aspects of it, but let me first start by reading a few quotes from the current CEO and the granddaughter of the founder. Her name is Snyder. This is what she wrote, a few things that she wrote in her book on In-N-Out. She said, if we became a publicly traded company, we could undoubtedly earn more money, but that's not one of our highest goals. Some things in life and business are more important than lining our pockets. Here's another thing she said. I want to tell you this right up front. For me, the absolute most important aspect of our business is one that you don't hear much in business anymore: God. She goes on to say, I've been a believer as long as I can remember. Our faith, put in its simplest terms, is about following the person, ministry, and teachings of Jesus Christ and knowing he is the Son of God. God is the glue that holds In-N-Out Burger together. And I never forget who's ultimately responsible for our success. It's this kind of thing that shows up over and over again throughout that book. And if you're interested in reading that book, it's called The Ins and Outs of In-N-Out Burger. It is a great read on the family story, how they started the company, the ups, the downs. We're going to talk about some of that on this podcast. But welcome to Every Sphere. My name is Eric Reed, and this is a podcast that gets into the fact that every sphere of life belongs to Christ. He doesn't want one room in your house, the Jesus room, where you go to church and where you go to do your quiet times, where, you have your prayers before you eat meals, right? Jesus doesn't want a room. The whole house belongs to him. And so you don't give politics a room. You don't give Jesus a room. You don't give business a room. You don't give family a room. What you begin to realize is that Jesus has the whole house, and then every room in the house, which is every sphere of life, belongs under the lordship of Christ. And that includes business. We're going to be looking at the story of this fascinating company, and a company, by the way, that is not new. They've been around since 1948. Now, what's so crazy about that is they, for the most part, have stayed in California for most of their existence. Only in more recent years are they starting to expand in other parts of the country. Particularly, they have moved here to the Southeast. They have located a headquarters outside of where I live in Franklin, Tennessee, and we actually have an In-N-Out Burger in my hometown. Who would have thought? In Lebanon, Tennessee, the birthplace of Cracker Barrel and now the home of In-N-Out Burger. And I want to share a story about the experience of In-N-Out coming here, because I think it tees up perfectly getting into their story and what makes them unique. When In-N-Out started building in Lebanon, the anticipation immediately started to build. People started talking about In-N-Out like it's really happening. There's the spot they're going to build it. You started to see the construction unfold, and people began to really get excited about this restaurant coming to Lebanon. Now, there were a lot of Californians and people like me who had traveled to California at some point or another and had a chance to eat In-N-Out, who were really excited about its coming. But if I'm being really honest, here's the truth of the matter. I would imagine 95% of the town and even the surrounding towns had never had In-N-Out Burger. It may even be a higher number. I mean, we're talking a small fraction of this local population have ever eaten at In-N-Out. And yet the anticipation, the buzz, the excitement was off the charts. And so In-N-Out finally is prepared for opening. Opening day comes, and as you can imagine, it is slammed. We're talking several hours to wait, whether you're waiting inside or whether you're waiting in the multi-lined, wrapped around the city drive-through. It was multiple hours to sit, and that lasted for days. It lasted for weeks. It lasted for months. And now the buzz and the newness of In-N-Out being in town has kind of passed its peak. And yet, at any given time, there's still loads of people inside eating. There are still cars in the drive-through. The parking lot is still filled with people who are eating at In-N-Out. And I imagine it's going to remain that way pretty consistently from here on out. A friend of mine, we went to In-N-Out and we went inside, and I had been there before, but I had kind of waited a little bit, hoping to, kind of avoid the crowds, let it die down some. But we went late one evening. We had to stand outside and wait in line, but it was pretty quick. We probably only waited about 15 minutes before we made it to a register. And we ordered our food, and then we stood in the restaurant that was packed full of people and waited. And one of the things that, we were talking about as Larry and I, this is Larry Davis, a friend of mine, Larry and I are watching the whole scene. We're watching the people in the kitchen hustling and bustling and making the food, all dressed, in their uniforms. Everybody's pristine, looks the same. And then you've got people walking the floor of the restaurant, and they're taking care of people, and they're talking with folks and giving kids hats to put on. And one of the girls walked by us, and we stopped her, and we're like, "Hey, let me ask you a question. Where are you from? Are you from here, or did you come in to help train?" And she said, "I'm a part of a group that helped train." She was a part of a group from Arizona, because Arizona's already had In-N-Out for a while, and she come here to train. And the way she started to describe the training process is only selected people were chosen to come be trainers. They have a certain standard. You have to meet certain, character criteria and experience. And then there are certain obligations and commitments that you're making. They put you in a hotel and you've got roommates. There are curfews. There is expectations around what you do or don't do when you're not at In-N-Out. They were working about 6 days a week, pretty long shifts. But whether you were the day shift or the night shift, you were not just free to just go do whatever you wanted. You weren't free to just go party downtown Nashville on your off time. And the reason for that, and you weren't just allowed to, you couldn't have people other than your roommate inside of your room. Now think about this. Why did they have those kind of standards? Because this is a company built on and rooted in Christian principles and values. And I'm going to talk more about this here in a little bit, but that doesn't just go to how to operate the business. It even goes to the moral characteristics of the employees, the expectations that they have on people. And if anybody even slightly violates it, it's not a warning. It's not a look the other way. They send them home. And so we're getting this rundown of their culture. And that's when Larry and I started to talk. And I was just explaining to him, think about how fascinating this is. This is a hamburger restaurant that started in 1948 across the country. They moved to a community that is, on the outskirts of downtown Nashville, where 95% of the people have never had an In-N-Out burger. And there are lines for hours, for weeks and months at a time to enjoy and experience this restaurant. How does that happen? How does that get accomplished? I mean, seriously, guys, think about this. How everybody would love to build a company that has that kind of reputation, that has that kind of fanfare, that has that kind of cult following, where people who have never had you will stand in hours lines in order to have a burger. A burger. Now, listen, there's going to be lots of people who are haters like, oh, it's not worth it. You know, it's overhyped. Here's the deal. I really enjoy In-N-Out. I think for what it is and appreciating it for what it is, it's spectacular. The business concept is brilliant. Their commitment to how they approach their ingredients and the freshness of their food, all of that I think is top notch. And I'm going to get into some of that. But as a concept in terms of doing things with excellence, they are a standout. And you don't just show up in a community and have this kind of fanfare overnight. This is something you have to build over time. This is something that you have to create, and it's hard work to create this kind of culture. This is decades and decades worth of creating a culture. And Larry and I were just talking about, just think about how crazy it is to consider that if he and I started a burger restaurant in Lebanon and did everything we could do from a marketing standpoint to create hype, maybe we do some fun social media stuff, maybe we try to create controversy. It doesn't matter what we try to do. We're not going to have the thousands upon thousands of people who are waiting for months on end in multi-hour lines from the moment they open to the moment they close. You're not going to get that when you just open a brand new place that has no reputation, has no track record, has no culture. So how do you build a culture that can transplant itself across the country? 95% of the people in that community have never had you, but are willing to stand in line for hours to eat your food. That is a fascinating conversation. And a part of the answer to that conversation is that they are building and have built a business that is built on certain principles and ideals that make the company successful. And I'm going to argue to you, these are Christian, these are godly principles. That's what I want to get into. Now, let me get into some details about In-N-Out. In-N-Out was founded by a man named Harry Snyder and his wife, Esther. Esther helped work with him. In fact, she really kind of helped do the books and some of the back end stuff, finances and those types of things. But Harry was kind of the brainchild. It starts in Baldwin Park, California, and it's really kind of a two-man husband and wife show. They're literally the only employees for a while. And the truth of the matter is like they've been family owned in this family, the Snyder family, from the beginning. So even still today, they don't franchise. They have not sold out to a private equity company. They've never gone public and become publicly traded. They've intentionally not done that, even though it could make them tons of money. Now, here's what's fascinating. I'm going to get into some details about the DNA, the culture. Harry, from the very beginning, was committed to certain things. He wanted a very, very simple menu, and he wanted to buy everything fresh. So he went and bought produce fresh every day, the lettuce and tomatoes and the onions. And he had a certain routine of, how those things needed to be chopped and cleaned and cut and ready. And then he handpicked the beef selection that would form their hamburgers, always fresh, never frozen. And so Harry approaches the restaurant and the company with this kind of approach from the very beginning. And his whole idea was, I want to make the best food with the freshest products and give them at the best prices that we can. And he kept the menu simple on purpose. He did not add lots of extra things, and In-N-Out has prevented kind of menu creep for decades. When all the other restaurants like McDonald's and Wendy's were fighting each other to see who could add salads and chicken and wraps and all the other things, In-N-Out has just stayed focused on making burgers, fries, and shakes. So that simplicity has been a strategic advantage for them because it allows for them to keep their cost under control. It allows for them to be really, really, really excellent at the few things they do rather than trying to do a bunch of things with excellence, but none of them with excellence, right? And you end up just being mediocre. They made that decision from the beginning. They've carried that through. Eventually, they relocate to some more stores and start adding stores. And so what starts happening is under Harry um, and under his wife, sorry, I lost her name, Esther, they start multiplying. And as they start multiplying different stores, obviously they start hiring people and they start replicating processes and systems, and they start to see real success. Harry, just real visionary and operations oriented. And he's actually, this is a wild story. I didn't know this. He's the one that invented the drive-through speaker. He literally invented a drive-through speaker so that people could order before they got to the window. So just incredible, incredible, innovation, ingenuity, all a part of this story. Now, Harry's wife, Esther, was a Christian. She was a strong believer. Harry was not a believer. At the time that he's doing all this building and working, he's not a believer. I'm going to get back into this in just a moment as we talk about it being a Christian, biblically based company. I think this will be an aha moment that will be fascinating for you. But Harry is not a believer. Harry is kind of tough on the boys. In fact, this is going to come up in the story, is that Harry's relationship to his boys borderline on abuse, emotional abuse, even some physical. And so there were issues there. Well, on Harry's deathbed, literally as he's dying of cancer, he dies in 1976, he comes to faith in Christ. And so Harry becomes a believer on his deathbed. And the family, now has this transition, and the leadership of the company goes to Harry's son, Rich, and he becomes the president of In-N-Out. Listen to this, at 24 years old. At 24. So when he inherits In-N-Out, there's 18 stores, and Rich becomes a big part of the expansion and multiplication of stores. They go from 18 stores to over 90 stores all throughout California. And you also have in this, you have, Rich is young, he's learning. And of course, Esther's still there. She's, still in the background. She's still kind of guiding things along. But Rich is a believer. And Rich is, a believer. And so is a second son, Guy Snyder, because of their mother. The mom is the matriarch of the family, is massive in this story. Even though she's never kind of like the top of the food chain in terms of leadership of the company, she is absolutely the heart of the company. And she's the one that has the influence on the dad. She has the influence on the sons, and even now Lindsay Snyder, who is the granddaughter who runs the company. It makes me think about my grandmother. Her name was Dorothy Reed. I called her again. She was the glue of my family. She was the matriarch who took most of us to church. She was the example for us in terms of a godly person, a godly woman. I remember on Sunday mornings, I would spend the night with her on Saturday night, go to church with her on Sunday morning. And I remember many Sundays waking up to seeing her reading her Bible and praying in her front dining room, her front living room. And she was the one that had the get-togethers, and she kept the family relationally tied together. And I think about Edith as being very much this for the Snyder family, but especially as it comes to somebody who transfers the faith. I said Edith, it's Esther. I apologize again. So Esther becomes that for this family. And you have Rich take over. He's 24. It expands. But then tragically, Rich dies in a plane crash. There's a tragic plane crash, and he passes away. And Guy, his brother, takes over after Rich passes. Now, in this process, Guy and Rich had some struggles. They had issues from their upbringing and trying to just figure out life, and relationship with dad and the company. And Guy, I think struggled some with not being the leader after his father Harry passed and not knowing what his place was. And so he had a place in the company, but Rich and Guy, weren't really close, and there were some issues there. But they reconciled a lot of those things, and Rich dies, and Guy takes over. Guy takes over. He begins to lead the charge, and then not too long after this, Guy dies as well. So Rich dies in 1993 from a plane crash. In 1999, just 6 years later, Guy Snyder, the second son, dies of a drug overdose. And it had been a drug overdose that had been happening, a drug addiction that had been happening for some time. Again, the relationship with Harry, the strain with Rich, and just struggles led to drug addiction that he would off and on deal with. Eventually, he overdosed in 1999. What ends up happening is Esther comes in, and she steps back and stabilizes the company. She steps back in, and a leader was put forward to be kind of a successor, a meanwhile, a placeholder to kind of bring stability, to help run the company. But the next person who was going to step into leadership was Lindsay Snyder, and that was the grandchild. She's the sole heir of the Snyders. And so she inherited the company, and she began to, over time, work her way into leadership. And she had to start just like everybody does. And this is part of their culture there. Everybody has to start the same way. They all have a system of things they have to learn, and they graduate to different parts of the restaurant and responsibilities in the restaurant. And she was forced to do the same thing. And Lindsay's story in itself is also just incredible. It's wild. She went through her own struggles. You think about the company, the pressure, her father, losing her father, Guy, to the drug overdose was tragic. So she had her own struggles. She talks about this in the book. She's been married and divorced multiple times. She's kind of always had her faith there, but there's been seasons where it was high or low. And then really the Lord just got a hold of Lindsay's life, and she was remarried to a man who's also a Christian. She steps into leadership of In-N-Out, and really her faith is driving her life at this point, rather than she's just running reckless and trying to hang on for the ride. She's kind of got her life grounded. She's following the Lord. Eventually, her grandmother passes, and the legacy of the Snyders, obviously being the one that founds this great company. But ultimately, it's a story of a family who were believers and who were Christians, but who also struggled. One of the things I resonated with a lot as I read the books wanting to learn more about the company, and I ended up learning a lot about their family and their family struggles. And the one thing I really appreciated about that is it's not disconnected from the story, because you wonder, well, how could a company be this good and this strong and run by Christians, but then they've had all this tragedy, and there's been abuse, and there's been addiction, and there's been loss, and there's been divorce, and there's been struggle. And I think Lindsay would be the first to tell you, they've not been some pristine, perfect family, but that's what real life Christians look like. Real life Christians look like people who don't have it all figured out, who don't always have cupcakes and rainbows following their story. Life is tough. Troubles come, afflictions arise. We all go through hardships, and sometimes it's hardships that are thrust upon us. Sometimes it's the consequence of our own boneheaded decisions, but that's life. And what demonstrates their faith and what demonstrates that they are genuine Christians is the perseverance that they do it with. It's the trust in the Lord that they do it with. And it's the continual demonstration of faith. They're putting their faith in Christ. And that's why the company, despite the Harry and Esther trials, despite the Guy and Rich trials, despite even Lindsay's ups and downs, the company has continued to be healthy and thrive not because everybody involved in it was perfect and always got it right. It's because they committed to doing things from a business perspective that aligned with God's design. And this is how I want to kind of wrap this up and talk about this, because I think it's fascinating. And this is a broader part of this project with Every Sphere, is to help explain and make sense of what I'm about to say. One of the things I think is super helpful, and if you're ever interested in reading more about this, there's a book here called Creation Regained by Albert Walters. Albert Walters. This was written in the 1980s, and I only just recently came into contact with this book. I've been thinking about, for years now, this idea that all of life is to be lived before the face of God. Coram Deo. Every sphere of life needs to be under the lordship of Christ. Whether we're talking about politics or technology or business or wealth building or family, you name it, it all belongs to him. Not just church stuff, but everything. And a part of what this show is about telling stories of people who live that way, and to really kind of just help keep teaching this by not just talking about the principles, but putting the principles into living color, people who fleshed it out. And I think the Snyders are a perfect example of this. I think In and Out is a great example of this. And so I hope to keep making this show better. I know there's a lot of things I can improve and update, the technology, the camera, all the things. I know that. And if you stick with me, hopefully this will keep just getting better and better. But I'm hoping there will always be real substantive, helpful discussion taking place on this show. And here's what I want to outline about the In and Out story and about some of these general principles, like I just talked about from this book. So God has created the world and has established his law. Now, when I say his law, let me define what I mean. God is the one who establishes and makes the world and everything in it, and he has created the world and all of his creatures in it to operate according to certain in particular laws. There's two kind of categories of this law. The first kind of law would be things like we're really familiar with, like natural law. Would be the laws of logic, the laws of nature. This is the laws of physics. This would include the laws of how our bodies operate and work. These are laws that God has fixed in the world. He has put in place. This is why the planets, orbit the way they do. This is why math works the way it does. All of these things, these are natural law, okay? God has built this into the world. There's a second kind of law, though, and this is the kind that many Christians are ignorant of, don't think about, are not aware, that's just as much as the first kind is the law of God. And this is what they are. It's the law that governs all these different spheres of life for how they flourish and operate, like business, like politics, like family, like marriage, like parenting, like wealth and finances. Here's what I mean by this. God has built into each of those things laws, or here's another word that is used in this book, norms. Laws or norms for how these things are built to operate, and if operated like that, will thrive and will flourish. Okay? Follow me on this. So if you are somebody who is not a Christian and you counsel a married couple who's struggling with some communication issues or some trust issues with one another, and you begin to counsel them in a way that gives them principles that are healthy and helpful for communication and trust, you know why it will work? It will work not because you're an unbeliever. It will work because you've tapped into God's law or norms for how relationships like this are flourishing and helpful. For example, you communicate honestly with each other and you don't make accusations, but you share openly and honestly. You listen with an attentive ear. You consider their perspective, and then you give back feedback, not from a defensive posture, right? These are norms. These are ways in which any person in the world, whether they're Christian or not, if they do it that way, it will work, okay? It's like if you, as a non-believer, will put gasoline in your car and you'll keep it oiled up and you take care of it, it will keep turning on and running for you, not because you're an unbeliever, but because you're operating the car in the way that it was designed. The way to think about this is this: every sphere of life, from the political to the financial to the business world, has a God-given set of norms by which these things are to operate. And if they operate that way, they will flourish. Business is the same. When you think about principles that make businesses flourish, you think about things like Harry Snyder decided to do, which is understand who your customer is and find ways to serve them with value. Provide them high quality food, fresh, never frozen, at affordable prices. Help them to get their food quickly and not have to wait very long. He's tapping into general principles of here's the kinds of things that will make this kind of business successful. The moment you quit caring about your customers' needs, the moment you stop providing value, but you keep raising your prices and you keep under delivering on the things that are expected of you, you're going to lose your business. And it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not a Christian. And so the thing to understand is this. This is why you can be a Christian family who has ups and downs and struggles, and you don't have a perfect life, and everything's not always up and to the right in your personal life, but your company can be thriving. Because here's the deal. You've tapped into God's norms for how things are to be done and to do them well. How do you build teams? God's created norms for that. How do you create healthy culture? God's provided norms for that. And In-N-Out is a perfect example of a company that has done this. They could sell their company and go public and make a ton of money. Now, here's the deal. There's nothing against norms that would prevent you from doing that. God doesn't say you can't do that. But they've decided, based on their own values, they want to keep ownership of the direction of the company because they want to keep running the company the way they want to. So, for example, this is something that she says in the book that I just think is incredible. She said, "We deliberately champion a slow growth philosophy. Long ago, we decided to grow only as fast as we can develop quality leaders. We don't grow to grow. With quality leaders in place, we can continue to ensure our high standards and grow at a calculated pace." Those are business decisions that are wise and, if executed, will lead to prospering. Why is that? Because if they grow slowly and they do so only at the pace that they can develop quality leaders, what are they ensuring? They're ensuring that they've always got enough quality leaders to put into places as they grow so that they can maintain their quality, their culture, their values, and their excellent service so that they can continue to grow, because they want to continue growing. They want to make a profit. That's what a business is built to do. But in the process of their growing, it's not growth for growth's sake, because then they could take shortcuts that would undermine and undercut the other things that they value. And so this is what I mean by those norms. And we'll talk more about this in future episodes because this will come into everything. But the way that a framework that this book helps you to think about this through is the idea of structure and direction. Okay, structure and direction. So think about it like this. Every single one of these spheres, from the political sphere to the family life sphere to the wealth building sphere to building teams to, right, you can just go down all these different things. Economics and, markets, all these types of fields of study and discussion, technology. Okay, they all have a structure, meaning God has built these things in certain ways to operate and flourish in those ways. And now the question is this: it's not whether a thing is secular or sacred. Remember, we're trying to get rid of that Gnostic divide, to think of things as secular or sacred. No. Because that automatically puts things into the church room or to all the other rooms, right? No, everything is in this middle ground here where it has a structure that is meant to operate. So the church is meant to operate a certain way, and a healthy Bible study group and your quiet time can operate a certain way. Your family life, your hobbies, your work, right? How you parent, right? They're all in this place. They have a structure behind it. How did God operate these things? What are the norms that make these things work? Now, watch this. The question is this: are we letting the brokenness of sin and the perversion of sin in a fallen world lead these things in a direction towards becoming profane and secular? Right? So, in other words, watch, politics isn't a bad thing in and of itself. It has a structure in which it's meant to work. God gives politics, God gives governance. The question is, what direction is it going? And left to itself, all these things will head towards a sinful, broken, secular direction. But because of Christ, because Jesus died and rose again and is Lord over all, and we are in him and have his spirit, we are redeeming these things. We are seeking to recreate and send them in the direction of the kingdom, as opposed to into the secularization or the perversion of the thing itself. So how does this business work? Here are the norms that which God has created businesses. The question is what direction are we going? Are we going towards the way that God has designed this? And are we redeeming God's design for business and how they serve people and how they make a profit and how they treat employees and all the things that businesses, if they do it well, are doing? Or is it going the other way? We'll keep talking about this on this show, but structure and direction. Structure and direction. Here's what a family should look like. What direction are you going? Right? Here's what handling finances and wealth should look like. What's the direction that you're going? Here are the norms for business. What direction is it going? And this is what I would say. In and out is understanding God's structure and design for what business exists to do. And they are going in the right direction. They are doing some incredible things beyond simply putting some Bible verses on their cups and packaging. They treat employees with dignity. They are incredibly responsible in how they approach things, how they handle employees and money and customers, and even what they're serving from the food they're serving. And they're generous. Here's another part of the story, and this is where I'll close. The tragedy and the pain and the hurt that has existed in the Snyder family is something that they are letting the Lord redeem, beauty from ashes. And they've started these foundations that the In and Out, prophets often go to. And so they have the In and Out Foundation, which was founded in 1984. Esther and Rich found this, and its focus is child abuse prevention. And they invest in foster care and shelters and family support systems. And this is because of the story of what Rich and Guy went through. And 100% of the admin costs are paid for by In and Out. Another charity that they've done is the Slave to Nothing Foundation. And they founded this in 2016, and its focus is human trafficking and substance abuse recovery. And this is kind of an ode and an homage to Guy, who struggled with addiction. And it gets into a very real issue with human trafficking that exists. And it's just incredible that they are putting their money where their mouth is in terms of where they've experienced brokenness. They're helping to bring healing and wholeness. And I just think that's an incredible story. And then the other thing that they're doing, which is a newer one, is they're helping to go after homelessness. They call it His Eyes Foundation. And they provide home for the poor, for homeless, immediate and some long-term support. And listen, I actually love how they do this in the drive-through line. The last several times that I've went, I've noticed it. You give your order, and it costs $9.54, and they say, "Would you like to round up to help the poor?" And it's like, man, what a statement! Like, would I like to round up to help the poor? Well, it's only 60 cents. Like, can I do 60 cents? Of course, I can do 60 cents. So yes, I would like to round up to help the poor. And every time somebody does that, that money is going into this foundation in which they're going to give and help. And I just can't speak enough about the culture of the company. I think it's fascinating. I love that there's been brokenness and pain, because here's what that tells me. It tells me that these are people who truly are clinging to Jesus through life. They know what it means to look to him in the midst of their struggle. And they know what it means to have to trust when Jesus says, "My grace is sufficient for you." and they live that out. And I think there has to be something that has crept into the culture of In-N-Out that makes it so appealing. Like the aroma of more than burgers and onions and fries is going out of there. The aroma of Christ is present because this is a company ran by people who not only love him, but who depend on him, who look to him, who are sustained by him, and who are looking and asking for him to be their help, their hope, their peace as they live their lives and as they try to run this company. So go check out In-N-Out Burger if you have one near you. If you do not have one near you, make a plan to visit somewhere that does. Pick up the book that Lindsay wrote. It's a fascinating deep dive into their story, into their faith. It's called The Ins and Out of In-N-Out Burger. I think you'll love it, and I think you'll be blessed by it. Hope this helps. Hey, if you like this show, send it to somebody. Subscribe. Every week, we're going to be releasing videos giving different examples of other people and other companies and other Christians who are in these different spheres of life, and they are living it for the glory of God because they realize every sphere of life matters to him and belongs to him, so we're called to live like it. Until next time.